I wasn't supposed to survive.
God.
I thought I could fool them. I thought I could stay human. But I didn't fool them. They fooled me.
The alarms were the first thing I remembered. The shrieking wail of a failing system, the rapid flashing of red warning lights bathing the cockpit in bloody hues. The ship shuddered violently, each jolt sending my body slamming against the restraints. I tried to steady my hands, gripping the flickering control panel as I struggled to make sense of the data. Hull integrity compromised, oxygen levels dropping, thrusters unresponsive. The planet below, a mass of swirling green and black, rushed toward me at a speed that made my stomach lurch. Impact was inevitable. I braced myself as gravity took over, wrenching me forward as the ship spiraled downward. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was a jagged piece of the viewport splintering inward, then the sickening sensation of weightlessness as I was thrown against the cold steel. I woke up gasping, choking on thick, humid air. My body screamed in protest as I pushed myself up, every muscle trembling. My head pounded with the rhythmic force of a failing pulse, my vision swimming in and out of focus. I was alive. That alone should have been impossible. I sucked in a slow breath, the air heavy with something damp and organic, like rotting vegetation. I was lying on something soft, not soil, not rock, but a thick, spongy surface that pulsed beneath me, as if breathing. When I shifted, it released a slick, clear fluid that clung to my hands. I swallowed hard, willing myself to ignore the rising nausea. My suit was damaged, a tear across the chest, but no puncture deep enough to break skin. I could feel my ship before I saw it, the wreckage a smoldering mass just beyond the tree line. The jungle stretched around me in every direction, towering stalks of deep, fibrous plant life swaying despite the absence of wind. The sky above was wrong, an unnatural shade of green, choked with sluggish, shifting clouds that twisted unnaturally. Then I heard them. A low murmur, distant at first, growing steadily closer. I turned too fast, the sudden movement sending a sharp pain through my skull. Shadows flickered between the thick foliage, dark figures moving in unison. I forced myself to my feet, my legs unsteady beneath me. They were getting closer. My fingers twitched toward the emergency knife strapped to my thigh. Then they emerged, tall, humanoid, their elongated faces smooth and expressionless, skin that shimmered like oil, shifting between hues of deep blue and black as they moved. Eyes, large, pupilless voids, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. They didn't speak at first. They only stared, dozens of them, their bodies impossibly still. My breath came fast, ragged. I had no idea what they were thinking, what they wanted. Then finally one stepped forward. It opened its mouth and a strange, lilting voice filled the air. The word was familiar, though the pronunciation was strange, warped. God. The others dropped to their knees, their whispers rolling over each other in a rising chorus. God, God, God. My blood ran cold. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. They were worshiping me. I wasn't a god. I was a stranded pilot, a man who had barely survived a crash, a man with no weapons, no rations, no way off this planet. But as I turned my gaze toward the twisted wreck of my ship, at the smoking remains of my last chance of escape, I realized something. If they believed I was a god, maybe I could survive. So I didn't correct them. I only stood there, silent and motionless, as they bowed deeper, their whispering voices growing into a fervent chant. And beneath my feet, the ground pulsed, slow, steady, and aware. They carried me into their village, not with force, not as a prisoner, but with careful reverence, like priests escorting a sacred relic. They surrounded me on all sides, their dark, pupilless eyes never breaking away from me, their shimmering skin rippling with each movement. The air was thick with a strange, cloying scent, something between overripe fruit and decaying wood. I felt it settle in my throat, clinging to my lungs like mist. The village, or whatever this place was, unfolded before me like something organic rather than constructed. The structures weren't made of stone or wood, but something softer, smoother, like grown architecture. The walls pulsed faintly, like they were breathing, slick with some kind of mucus that shimmered under the dim light. Thick, fibrous strands stretched from building to building, weaving a canopy overhead, filtering the eerie green glow of the sky above. They led me toward the center, toward the altar. It stood like a monolith, a jagged black slab embedded in the ground, its surface covered in intricate carvings that twisted in ways that made my stomach churn. At its base lay something wrapped in fibrous strands, like silk spun too tightly around a cocoon. The scent was strongest here, thick, pungent, wrong. I didn't move. One of the aliens stepped forward, its elongated fingers reaching out, grasping the strands. With a single pull, the fibers unraveled, and what lay beneath made my breath catch in my throat. It was a body, or at least what remained of one. It had been peeled, the flesh removed in careful spirals, exposing the glistening muscle underneath. But the worst part wasn't the mutilation, it was the motion. The exposed flesh moved, it twitched, writhing in slow, unnatural pulses, shifting like it was still alive. No, like it had never stopped being alive. The muscle fibers coiled and flexed, something slithering beneath the surface in steady, hungry undulations. I staggered back, but hands caught my shoulders, gently, almost reassuringly. One of the aliens turned to me, silent, waiting. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, it reached down and pulled a piece free. It shouldn't have come off so easily. The meat separated without effort, as if offering itself, the exposed tissue beneath already knitting itself back together. A thin, clear fluid leaked from the wound, shimmering with unnatural iridescence. The alien turned to me, holding out the offering. I shook my head. I didn't need to understand their language to know what they wanted. A god must partake. A god must consume. I tried to refuse, but the silence that followed was unbearable. The creatures stared, their devotion unwavering. If I rejected their ritual, would they still see me as their deity? Or would they realize the truth, that I was nothing more than a man who had fallen from the sky? I had no weapons, no ship, no way off this planet. I needed them. So I reached out with a shaking hand and took the flesh of the divine. It was warm, pulsing. The moment it touched my palm, a dull thrum crawled up my arm, like something beneath the skin had awakened. I hesitated only a moment longer. Then I put it in my mouth. It melted on my tongue. The texture was soft, yielding, not meat, not quite. But the moment it touched my throat, the pain came. It started as a searing heat, blooming in my chest and spreading outward, burning beneath my skin like fire racing through my veins. My stomach clenched violently, my vision fracturing, colors bleeding at the edges, distorting. Then the spasms began. My limbs jerked, muscles convulsing, bones grinding together. Something inside me was changing. My skin rippled, stretched, my fingers spasming as new sensation flooded through my nerves. I hit the ground hard, choking back a scream as my vision flickered in and out of focus. The aliens did not move. They only watched. I tried to push myself up, but my arms weren't my own anymore. My fingers elongated, the skin pulling taut, veins darkening beneath the surface. The hunger that came next was unbearable, deep, gnawing, something ancient and wrong clawing at my insides. I gasped, my breath ragged. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was the aliens kneeling once more, their voices rising in a single reverent whisper. The flesh of the divine. I woke to the sound of my own breathing. It was wrong. Too deep. Too slow. Each inhale rattled through my lungs, thick and wet, like something was growing inside me. My body ached, stretched tight over unfamiliar shapes. My skin burned with a dull, lingering heat, as if I'd been left out in the sun too long. My fingers twitched involuntarily, and when I finally forced my eyes open, I saw why. My hands weren't the same. The fingers were too long, the bones inside reshaped, the joints sharper, bending at angles that weren't right. The nails had thickened, curling into something closer to claws, translucent and jagged. The veins beneath my skin pulsed dark, spreading outward from my wrists like roots digging deeper into flesh. Panic surged through me. I scrambled up from the damp, living floor of the structure they had given me. A chamber with walls that shifted when touched, leaking a warm, amber-colored fluid that smelled like copper and earth. My head spun, my body sluggish, uncooperative. My chest ached. When I reached up to touch it, I felt something wrong. Beneath my ribs, just below the skin, something moved. I froze. I could feel it shifting inside me, something slick and wet, curling around my bones, wrapping itself deeper into the spaces between my organs. My heartbeat wasn't alone anymore. There was another rhythm, pulsing in tandem, something foreign but familiar. I stumbled toward the chamber's exit, pressing my palm against the fleshy threshold. It peeled open with a wet, organic hiss, the outside air thicker than before. My breath hitched as I stepped out into the village. They were waiting for me. The aliens knelt, heads bowed, bodies trembling in something close to ecstasy. The moment they saw me, a ripple passed through them, one of awe, of expectation. Their large, dark eyes locked onto my form, drinking me in, watching the changes that had already begun to shape me into something else. One of them, taller than the rest, wearing a mantle of glistening dark fibers, stepped forward. It reached out a slender, many-jointed hand and touched my arm. A spark of something electric ripped through my nerves. A sound left my throat, something guttural, wrong, more growl than voice. The alien recoiled in delight as if I had proven something to them. The others began whispering in their strange, lilting tongue, repeating the same word over and over. I didn't need to understand their language to know what they were saying. They had been waiting for this. For me. I turned away, my vision blurring at the edges. The hunger gnawed at my stomach, a deep, hollow ache, a need that wasn't mine. I forced my way through the gathered crowd, each step heavier than the last, my body not entirely mine anymore. I needed air. I needed to think. The jungle loomed ahead, its trees, if they were trees, rising like massive tangled veins, twisting in grotesque muscular knots. The ground beneath them was uneven, soft, pulsing with an unnatural warmth. The deeper I went, the stronger the feeling inside me became. Something calling to me, something my new body recognized, even if my mind refused to. Then I saw them. At the edge of the jungle, standing just beyond the flickering light of the village, were the others. Not the aliens. The gods that came before me. Their bodies were grotesquely warped, their limbs stretched too long, their skin glistening with something not entirely solid. Some had extra joints, spines that twisted upward in spirals, faces that had melted into something new. Their mouths were wrong, gaping things lined with rows of mismatched teeth. They didn't speak. They only stood there, watching, waiting. I staggered back, horror rising in my chest, bile burning my throat. These were the ones who had come before me. The ones who had fallen, the ones who had eaten, the ones who had grown, and I was becoming one of them. I had to run. I had to get out. But my body was failing me. My legs felt heavy, like they weren't mine anymore. The bones inside them had lengthened, the muscles wrapped too tight over shifting joints. My breath came in ragged gasps, too deep, too slow, not human anymore. The jungle pulsed around me, alive in ways I didn't want to understand. The air was thick, humid, breathing, sinking into my skin with every step. My vision blurred, my nerves crawling with sensation, my fingers twitching with phantom impulses that weren't mine. The hunger was unbearable now. It wasn't the kind that clawed at my stomach. It was deeper, a need that sat at the base of my spine, in the marrow of my changing bones. A craving for something warm, something alive. I gritted my teeth, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't let them take me. The village was behind me now, but I could still hear them, my worshippers, their voices rising in fevered adoration. They had given me their offering, their belief, their devotion. And in return, I had become exactly what they wanted, a god. I stumbled forward, pushing deeper into the tangled undergrowth, my mind racing. There had to be a way out. There had to be something, anything, left of me to save. Then the ground shifted. The earth beneath my feet trembled, and I felt it. Something vast, something aware, just beneath the surface. A shudder ran through the jungle, then slowly it rose. A shape loomed in the darkness ahead, colossal, heaving, alive. Not a structure, not a creature, but something between the two. A mass of pulsing flesh, coiled and ever-growing, layers upon layers of god flesh, fused together in an endless undulating horror. Faces, twisted, hollowed, broken, emerged from the mass, their mouths open in silent, eternal screams. The others were here, not the ones I had seen in the jungle, not the ones who had changed like me. These were the oldest, the ones who had been worshipped long before my arrival, the ones who had been gods before there was anyone left to pray to them. I fell to my knees, my body shaking violently. The pain inside me surged, growth, expansion, transformation, something new pushing through my flesh. I clutched at my chest, my fingers pressing against soft, shifting skin, the outline of something beneath, something struggling to break free. The voice was no longer whispering. It was inside me now, filling every corner of my mind, every nerve, every aching, broken piece of me. More. Grow. Become. The realization hit me like a knife to the gut. This planet didn't worship gods, it made them. And once they were made, they were consumed. I was never meant to rule. I was never meant to leave. I was meant to feed it. The ground split open and the tendrils came. They shot up from the earth, slick and pulsing, wrapping around my limbs before I could move. They burrowed into my skin, slipping beneath the flesh, fusing with the new things inside me. My veins ignited, a new hunger replacing my terror. I felt them, all the others who had come before, the ones who had run, the ones who had fought, the ones who had failed. They had all been brought back here, absorbed, broken down, made one. The faces in the writhing mass of flesh turned toward me, their mouths stretching wider in silent screams. Their eyes, dark, hollow, endless, welcomed me. I tried to resist. I tried to hold on to who I was, but it was too late. I had already changed too much. The hunger, the voice, the shifting in my skin, it wasn't inside me anymore. I was inside it. The tendrils tightened and my body sank into the growing mass, swallowed whole. The last thing I saw before the world melted away was the village. The aliens knelt in the distance, their heads bowed in reverence. They were already waiting for the next one to fall from the sky.